Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
All right. Yep. It's working.
All right.
We're good. So I'm here with Diane Gordon, a longtime friend / boss / mentor. And I'm just super happy to chat with you because this is your sweet spot. And I think one of the, I want to say founders of the customer success type role, but definitely when things got into the SaaS world, you became sort of one of the leaders. And so now I'm just happy to chat a little bit about your background. And we can, start at sort of that Endeca role where we met, and we don't need to talk about, I don't think either of us need to go back. Well, I graduated college, and then I folded jeans at the Gap.
Yeah. It's nice to see. It's really nice to see.
Oh, same here. I'm going to this is going to be super loud. I'm going to push the microphone closer to you because I have a much louder voice.
Okay. So, yeah, I do think of Endeca as the place where SaaS was just in its infancy, and I specifically remember getting that interview process where the big concern was, the reason they were looking for somebody was that it was a SaaS business and they were coming up on their first set of big renewals and realized that no one had really talked to the clients.
Right. You've got a classic line that I love.
A year, it's sort of like, it was we're worried our sales reps are going to roll up in their Mercedes asking for the renewal, and the clients are going to be like, I haven't talked to anyone in 6 months.
Right.
So the first...
Because the model was just us project managers.
Yeah, of course.
We would go implement it. Everything good. And then it was like...
Sure, and we would answer support calls and be perfectly lovely, but we weren't reaching out to talk about, hey, you feel like you're getting your money's worth. Because it was the classic old model of, hey, if you need something, give us a call.
Yeah.
And I remember specifically being told, we need to call all these people now and just make nice so that they're not surprised when the salespeople show up. And that was really the first time I had really thought about it, because I'd always worked with software that was, you paid a...
go and install it somewhere.
Maybe there was a maintenance fee yearly, but so we really had to start thinking about what proactive touch looked like that wasn't just annoying. That wasn't just sort of calling up and saying, so everything okay?
Right.
Because, it's not really helpful. And instead starting to think about, well, if we're going to hire people to do outreach to them, what do we want them to do to get these clients really engaged, make sure they're using the software? So that was, I remember forming that team at Endeca was the first time I'd ever done something like that.
Yeah, I remember things like paid audits and things like that.
Absolutely. And it worked.
Absolutely.
Actually, what was surprising to everyone, including me, was that team ended up generating a bunch of revenue, which was not the intent.
Right.
The intent was please protect our revenue. Right. But that team, what ended up happening is they built relationships that ended up helping us identify expansion opportunities, additional sales. So that was a big sort of aha moment, I get it. This is good not just for retention, but for expansion.
That's right.
But it also, I mean, since then, obviously held a number of roles where managing that CSM function and.
What was it, Bullhorn, where things started just blowing up in the for me it's wait, they now have software for this, Gainsight, and I know you wrote the forward to that and everything. I felt like it was right around that time frame where it was this. Oh, it's success now. Is that what the role is? And
and because it's actually a different role than your classic sort of implementation project manager, and I think that was took people a while to realize that it's actually a job of managing a portfolio of clients, which is. If you're an implementation person, you might have 5 or 6 of those you're running, but they're projects. You run them on timelines, you have your scheduled things. Whereas if you're a CSM, it's more like you have a book of business, and your job is to keep that book of business really healthy. And where health is defined by, not like a salesperson is defined by closing business. For a CSM, the metrics are different. And I think that was everybody's like, well, what are the metrics? How do you, if I have, I'm managing a book of 40 clients, what is my job actually, and how do I measure whether it's going well? So the notion of what does a healthy client look like started coming up. Like, is it just that they're not calling support, they're not on fire, so therefore they're happy? Or is it that there's actually a way of looking at their usage? So the notion of, hey, any SaaS vendor has a lot of data about what their clients are doing in their software. Are they logging in? That's thing one. And then are there specific features you want them to use? They could be logging in, but if they're not using the sticky stuff, it's
then
not
they could
useful.
So
that was, and I think what began to happen is a lot of SaaS vendors at that time began to have those same needs, which is where vendors like Gainsight came from. This is how do we provide this role with a dashboard of what's important to them?
Without having an email, operations or engineering, like, can you pull a report for me? And they're like, oh my God, like, you and everybody else, absolutely.
Or you realize, oh my gosh, we can see that customers that stay with us do a lot of X. Well, let's now have programs to drive X for the rest of our clients. So I think that I do think that the Gainsights and platforms like that are purpose built for this role, and they're super. It's a necessary thing.
Absolutely.
As you grow, I think if if you're a CSM that is working with very large accounts, maybe 5 accounts, you probably don't need something like that.
Because you're on top of it.
Usually, those and the relationships, and you have all that. But for any reasonable portfolio size, that's super required. But also, what I began to learn is that the person in this role is pretty different from. It's not a project manager, right? And it's good if they have those skills. Not a salesperson, right? But it's this person who's great at building relationships and great at talking about value and impact. And so that sounds squishy, kind of like a salesperson, but they also have to be rigorous in their attention to the cadence of communications, and doing check-ins at specific times and having very specific conversations. And so what ends up happening is that piece of that role is really great for like a project manager person. But a classic project management person is really uncomfortable with talking about value and impact.
Exactly.
So it turned out to be a perfect home for people who like to be consultative but don't want a quota. Right? And it's
So on that quota thing, oh my God, because I talked to Renee and Adriana, all these people that and everything.
Everyone has a view on this.
And everyone has a view on it. And I think the view is what we discussed right before I hit record, which is what works for the company right now. But beyond that, the view that I've seen the most not divisive, but just the different opinions.
There's a lot of conflict,
Right? And one of them is the classic, like, who gets the commissions on the upsell, or who lost the upsell, right? And then there's some other ones, but I wanted to just see your opinion on that one first.
So my view on this is actually from the client perspective, which is I believe that as a client, you can tell when somebody talking to you has a quota. And I know there are people that disagree with me on this, that's fine. But if you're a client and you know that the person talking to you has a quota, you behave differently with that person than you do with a person who doesn't have a quota. You just do. You're more forthcoming.
Oh, I know.
You'll say anything. Whereas if you know that they have a quota, you're like, are they telling me this? I really like them and I want to trust them. But are they telling me this because they really care about what's good for me? Or is it because they've got their Q4 number to hit? And so it's less about, it is also true that it's if you're a really awesome CSM, you're often not comfortable selling. That's true, but I think you can fix that problem. For me, it's
I have seen that work for some people. It was like, oh my God, like I love the product so much that sometimes it's on that product, right?
Like that training and get over that discomfort. It's more around if you want the client to feel like this person is engaging with them around value, and they, if they also sort of have their hand out it feels different.
This is so funny, and this shows where nothing against the other people I've talked to, but like where your expertise comes in, because you're the first person that said this is how the customer feels. Everybody's sort of like, well, the account people, we need to incentivize them, and it's about the percentage based, and it's a cost center. So that's the other thing, right? It's a cost center.
It's a cost center. So I mean, you can figure out the comp stuff and all that, but if you're a client and you go, look, your CSM is the person who's going to guide you on this journey, who's going to make sure when you look at the impact metrics that you hit the ones you meant to hit. And then we also have this account manager,
right,
whose job it is to look for business and
right,
to handle your renewal. And, it's commercial versus not commercial.
Yeah.
And if you can afford to do that, it's the best model for the client.
Right. And that's the sort of next question I was going to ask, like, what's the profile of the companies? Because I've seen some companies try and do it with the non-commercial aspect of it, and then it's like, but I do fully, you have to embrace the benefit that they're bringing in, which is your churn.
I think if you do that too, like account manager can have a pretty significantly larger portfolio than a CSM. So let's say a CSM can handle, depending on size of clients we're talking about, let's say they can handle, 50 clients. Well, the account manager might be able to handle 100.
Wow.
Yeah,
because they're just going and getting contracts.
Yeah, I mean, so the way I think about it is the account manager's job, simply put, those two people should never have to be in the same call or the same meeting.
Okay.
And what that implies is that you either have systems for information sharing, or they're really good at information sharing and they trust one another. Mm-hmm. But imagine that a CSM has their portfolio of whatever, 30, 50, depending on, the account manager should be focused not on building relationships with that same set of people, but with other people.
Right. Who else would this be good for? Right.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, depending on deal size, the person the CSM is working with isn't the buyer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if it is the buyer, of course, the account manager should also have a relationship there, but they should be focused on how can I be thinking about broadening and deepening these relationships so that if that person leaves or
you're not like, oh my God,
falls out of love with us or whatever. So I think, the truth is that it always makes sense to split that role, and the excuse of, well, we're too tiny to do that. I think it actually, I think it's short-sighted.
Yeah.
So,
especially if you've got churn issues, and so you decide to create a CSM group.
Yeah, now, for example, here at Panorama, at the very low end, we have schools that are very small, that are under, say, 5,000 students.
And you're going for, we should probably tell people the 1 minute on Panorama, so they get the context.
Panorama is in the business of ensuring that all kids have a great educational experience and are able to get to college if that's their path, or to wherever their path is, regardless of income level or skin color or background or culture or anything, right, that all kids get a fair shake at an awesome educational experience.
Yeah.
That's the mission. And so we have a set of products that enable teachers and school administrators and parents and kids to be able to look at that whole child to understand what's working for them and what isn't, by combining social emotional learning data, academics, behavior, grades, the whole attendance,
right,
all that stuff, to kind of go, hey, for Jeff, for example, the way he learns is like this, and as a result, we need to think about his path a little differently.
It's almost like the CSM for the child.
It is, yeah.
It's the game side. Exactly.
So, but we are a business,
yes,
and so at the very large end, we have, for example, Boston Public Schools, New York City Schools, massive
districts,
organizations, right? At the very low end, we might have a single school
right,
buying from us, a single charter school. And at that end, we can't really afford to double staff that client.
Yeah.
So in that case, what we're doing is we are saying to the CSM, you own the renewal as well.
Yeah.
And the reason we do that is because if it churns,
yeah,
it's less of a hit test.
Right,
it doesn't make it. So I think there's a financial point at which you look at what a client is spending with you,
sure,
and you determine what your service delivery model is.
Yeah.
And that's true. Set aside the AM CSM. They might even decide they don't get a CSM, that what they get is a virtual.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like a community kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we do, in some cases, don't assign account managers to some of our clients because it costs too much to do
that makes, and that's a part I was curious about, because I like the community aspect, or it's like, we'll get you off the ground, which we're going to cover in a second, and then it's like you've got a forum or
That's right.
learning.
Yeah, and that is indeed, well, we used to call it self-service, and that was actually, it was good. We've actually added a little bit of a touch now to the self-service clients, just because we found they were hitting a couple of bumps.
Okay.
So we do that. We do kick off each individual client, but then we introduce them to the community. Okay. It used to be sort of like you get an email. And
here's your activation. And
some clients could deal with that and some not so much.
Right.
But either way, once you decide that the renewal is worth paying attention to, I'm a big fan of having an account manager.
So nice natural segue, because the next, and I swear this comes up like once a week when I'm talking to people, is the whole account gets signed. Then you get your CSM there. To the I mean, again, this depending on the product and things like that. Implementation, right? The launching, the path to get there. What do you think are some of the best practices that you've come across in terms of? I've personally, on complicated things, had an implementation team.
Yep.
Super complicated things, and when I went and talked to all the account managers, and our NPS was down, and our internal NPS was down. It was like, I've got 40 customers. I do one implementation a year, and it's like a bomb goes off in my life. I do the implementation crappy, and then I do my account management crappy. Everything's crappy.
Yeah, I mean, account managers shouldn't be doing implementations like ever.
Yeah.
So ideally, and we're not doing this here yet, ideally what you have is, there are career project managers who are great at standing up software.
Right.
Like that's what they do.
Yeah.
And then post stand-up, or near the end of that, you transition to the CSM.
Right.
And then they go on, the implementation person goes on to their next project.
Right.
And if you do that, they can handle a bunch of projects at one time.
Right.
But that's, then they...
Is it a clean break, or is it, because the way I did it before, I'm not saying it was the best either, is that, they're around, they're the quarterback, it's just that they're handing it off to us right now to get you the implementation.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some transition time, but ideally, the only reason they get involved again is if the client needed to do some additional work. So, for example, here they may say, we've now bought another product from you.
Okay.
Of course, we go back to the,
Yeah.
at the moment, our CSMs do implementation and follow-on care.
Okay.
And the challenge with that is it's two very different kinds of work.
Right.
You typically find that people in that job are good at one or really good
No,
at one
absolutely.
or the other. They can do both.
Yeah.
From an implementation perspective, I think like the best thing I learned in the last few years is that the thing to do, it just seems so obvious, but at the start of implementation is to say back to the client the reason why they bought.
Right.
And that is what they're trying to accomplish.
Right.
Not in some like squishy, you bought because you care about kids.
Right.
Like, and that's
your internal
probably,
success metrics.
right.
Like,
how will you know that this money was well spent?
Right.
We'll know because our achievement gaps between black students and white students will decrease.
Gotcha.
And we won't know that for 2 years, but we'll have indicators that look like this.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Everything we do now is
driven towards that.
So great. You re-say that, or they go, yeah, that is what we said during the sales cycle, but actually now what we care about is that, families feel like they don't have a voice. So we want families to feel like that, and we'll know that because when we take a survey a year from now, they'll say that.
Yeah.
Right now our results are really bad. Restating that and then saying it again multiple times.
When the requirements change 3 weeks down the road, and it's like, remember when we said that thing about
So this is still what you care about, right? Because I think what happens classically is the implementation person says, great, let's stand you up. We have a process.
Yep.
It's almost like it doesn't matter like why you bought.
Yeah.
Our process is we go through these 27 steps.
Right.
We have these check-in meetings.
Right.
You say whether we're red, yellow, or green, and then we're done. Right.
And usually when they're like that, I've found that their bonus percentage comes out of some type of metric.
So what happens is the client goes, well, I'm implemented, but I don't really feel like I'm live.
Right.
You hear that all the time, like, yeah,
it was okay.
I don't really are we done? Are we done here?
And how long is your current, just on average?
It's interesting, our surveys product is totally seasonal.
Okay.
So we're kind of like, that product, it's not SaaS in the classic sense because schools and districts typically do surveys 2 or 3 times a year. Like, right, we're in survey season right now for back to school. And we'll do it again in the spring. And some schools do it in the winter as well. So the SaaS aspect of that is around their use case.
Okay.
So we're running their surveys now, and doing that takes a couple weeks. Helping them look at their results. The next step is the CSM piece, which is, okay, what do you do now that you see those?
Right.
Our other product, Student Success, is very much SaaS. It's the one that ties all of the student data together and enables you to look at the whole child. And that standing that up takes, depends on which systems they want to integrate with, but takes 2 to 3 months.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then after that, it's like, okay, well now all this data is coming in all the time, every day you're seeing new data.
Right.
What are you doing with that?
Yeah.
And it, definitely the setting up of that is a project management thing.
Right.
And you don't really need somebody with CSM skills to do
Right.
that.
It sounds to. Do you have you had to have different profiles of CSMs based on that particular use case? Because I would think that there's
one of the things we've run into is that we hire CSMs that are pretty skilled, and then 2 or 3 times a year they're doing this really rote thing, and it is a drag for them.
Yeah.
And so what we're looking at now is there a way to carve off some of that work, put it into a support queue or something
Right.
like that, because most of the year they're totally happy, and then all of a sudden they're like, survey drones.
Yeah, I'm just
right?
doing the surveys. And
yeah, and that just doesn't feel great.
Yeah, a little
and
bit of a death march. Yeah, exactly.
But what they still need to do is after the survey's been run and the reports are available, that's when they kick back in and can have these consultative conversations with clients. Say, oh, based on the data we're seeing, here's what you want to do.
Right.
And so that's really interesting to them.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they have to have been one to push the generation button, right?
Right.
So my point about restating what the impact goal was at the start of the life cycle and carrying that as a thread throughout makes all the difference when renewal time comes up, right? Because now it's not just about, does the client like you? And I firmly believe with the client will renew for the first year or 2 just because they like you, and after that they'll be like, hey,
and there's some other stuff out there, and
I'm spending $100,000 a year with you, and I can't tell if it matters,
Right, and especially now in these days, because I think we talked about Endeca and then Baltimore, and then somehow after some of those time frames, it became a lot easier to switch software vendors.
So much easier. Yeah. Now, I mean.
Drop your credit card in, and then everybody's software is a little different.
Yeah, and the more integrated you are with other systems, the harder it is.
Right.
But ideally, that's not the reason people stay with you, because it's hard to unplug.
Oh, you're sticky. Make sure we got to get in there, because then they'll not want to pull us out. I'm like, we shouldn't need to rely on that.
If you have to, like Salesforce. It's really hard to unplug. That's not a great.
Yeah.
I'm sure people love it as well. Some people must love it, but that's not ideally.
Right.
The way to keep clients.
Yeah. The arm behind the back. Yeah.
Exactly. Go ahead, try to leave.
So I've had these are all interesting, and I remembered when we talked about Panorama before, they had lots and lots of educational people who had been teachers and whatnot. Have you sort of diversified the staff at all like that?
Well, we've had to, right?
Okay.
Because as you grow, at some point you run out of people who have
teachers
been
that want to
in that domain space. I think when I joined, well, maybe I'm the second person on the executive team that didn't come out of that space.
Okay.
We've just had to, because the pool is too small.
Right.
So now what we've done is started as part of our onboarding, having a part of the onboarding that's about learning the space.
Right.
Because the language is different, what people care about is different, the timelines are different, and also just when you think about getting in the corporate world, understanding the hierarchy of managers, directors, it's totally different in education. So you've got superintendents, assistant superintendents, and it's a little bit like the military in terms of how people move through it.
Yep.
So now our job is, when we hire people who don't come out of the space, to educate them on the space.
So let me get you on this, because in the last time I did this, it shifted into a millennial type conversation, which I don't want into, but because I don't believe in any of that. But when you do your persona development for things like that, if you said, hey, I'm going to expand my count by 5, next quarter or something like that, and your HR manager says, great, I want to talk about the profile of the person. I'm not trying to lead the witness, because I just remembered what the last person said. But when you think of the person that's best for this type of role, You talk about project manager and this and that.
So specifically the CSM role, I would say generally, set aside the project management stuff, although it's currently, because we have it blended, it is important the person can do that work.
Right.
I don't care if they're not an awesome project manager.
Right. They can check the boxes. They understand that A needs to happen and then B needs to happen.
Exactly. I mean, I would always, of course, whoever it is, I don't care in any job, they have to be super well organized.
Right.
But what we're really looking for is people who have like I think of it as client service DNA.
Yeah.
They're the person who, if it's hot in the room, they get up to open the window.
Right.
They're like, I'm describing
You're adding to society.
Right. Like, they're the person who's like, something's not right here, I should fix it.
Right.
And so people who, I mean, honestly, super junior people who've worked in retail.
Yeah.
And enjoyed that work, or worked at a Starbucks.
Yep.
And like they liked it.
Yeah.
Because they liked waiting on people. I think client, like that service DNA is the best CSMs you have.
That's awesome.
That. Yeah.
I worked at the Gap for like 4 years.
There you go. And it's like, it's not, of course there's annoying clients, but mostly it's like it makes you feel good to help people.
Yeah.
There's just something about
that.
Yeah,
no,
profile.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And also like the empathy aspect is super important. And this is not to like total name drop, but for some reason it's sticking in my head. When I was in college, I worked at the Gap. I was like the shipment guy or whatever. Jeans would come in overnight and I'd stock the shelves. So I was in Burlington and Nancy Kerrigan comes in and she is just hard to deal with at the time or whatever. Okay. But and everybody's like, she comes in here. Like you think you'd be starstruck and people are like, I'm not dealing with her today.
Right. Yeah.
And then I'm like, I go over and I'm like, can I help you? Is there something wrong? She's like, I just can't find with this and that. And then I'm just like, she's just frustrated, right? Sure. So I'm like, listen, I stock all the jeans in the back. I know exactly what you need. Here you go. Walk away. Treat them like a normal person and everything. It's just like,
it's the ability to like. Your average person without the service DNA is just like, I'm out.
Yeah.
As opposed to the service DNA, it's like a puzzle. It's like,
what's going on?
I can turn you.
Right. Like, I wonder what's going on. And it's funny because even junior project managers, when I train them, I'm like, that person, when they're super upset on the phone, they're worried about getting fired, right? It's not you. It's not because you couldn't get the Zoom up and everything fast. It's because they're like, oh my God, I'm running this thing and it's going to be a disaster.
It's also like just really putting yourself in their shoes. I mean, if I was on a call with a client 2 days ago and she's just like, this report just isn't working, and I could feel like she's on deadline. Her superintendent needs this.
Yeah.
I'm like, we will fix this for you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be like, I could feel her stress through the phone. But that's what I mean. Like, I'm sort of built for this.
Yeah.
And even after all this time, and the more senior you get in these roles, as you probably know, you tend to only talk to unhappy clients.
It's true.
Right? Because all the happy ones never get to you.
It's right.
So
that's why I never took on that classic now by the way, here's the support team. Right. I'm like, I'm all.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, my instinct is, I would love everybody to be happy, right? So primarily we look for that. We look for evidence of empathy, evidence of sort of that service DNA, creative problem solving, and we look for examples of, tell us a time when, you had to get multiple people that didn't work for you to do something.
Right.
A time when that worked and a time when it totally did not work. And what did you learn from that?
Right.
We're looking for people who have made mistakes and have learned from them.
Right.
Some technical experience is good, but not totally required.
Right.
So for us, it's a profile. Right. But they do have to be like pretty well organized, great at using,
And it's funny, on the well organized, I can't remember if it was Renee or if it was Adriana, but it was basically said, I will take a mom that can only work 30 hours because she's got to get the hell out and pick up her kids. And her schedule
Something
is.
You can juggle. Because I think of it as I don't know if when I went to the circus, I remember these guys that would spin plates.
Absolutely,
plate spinners. And they have like 12 plates, they spin them, and that's the job, right? And how do you know when to go over and give one a tap, right?
Yep. I think I've seen a couple CSMs that their job title they've put in is like professional plate spinner.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that, but in a sort of intentional way, right? It shouldn't feel like chaos. And definitely I've seen CSMs that love talking to clients but can't manage their calendar, can't manage a task list,
right?
And then they're constantly being surprised, and that won't work.
Yeah.
So it's it's kind of a really kind anal person.
Yeah, exactly. So where do you see this role, this title, this whole thing? I've seen some crazy consolidation, right? I've seen some places where customer success is the overarching umbrella where you've got services and support and all of these things. I'm just wondering your opinion or what you've seen.
So that's what we call client success here. The name
I
of
like
the
that
service,
name,
client success. And in that is everything that's post-sale.
Yeah.
And I just think generally that's a good way to structure because, the client goes through all parts of the organization and there's this common thread and, it's not like some other group in the company is onboarding them and then we get them.
Right.
So there's, our norms, our standards for dealing with clients are the same across the CS organization. Yeah. I think the CSM role, is evolving into a much more consultative role than it used to be. And I think ultimately clients, especially enterprise software companies, will have CSM roles that evolve into like consulting architect kinds of roles at the super high level, right? Because they would be the right people to do that.
Is it because they understand the business problem that they're trying to solve?
Understand the business problem and they have the relationships with the client.
Yeah.
So you go from like CSM with a portfolio of 30 clients to senior CSM to, now I'm dealing with really strategic clients. And now maybe I'm actually embedded with clients as their CSM.
Yeah.
So
like sitting in a cube a couple hours a week and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's not quite consulting services, but it's close.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's a nice career path because I'm sure people are like, well, what is it? Do I just handle more customers that are harder to deal with? Or,
that's right. Like here, we have this leveling. So I'm a CSM level 1, a level 2. Like, all right, so, and then what? Right. And I think the truth is, and we have a group of, we have strategic engagements clients, so like New York City Schools, massive. And the CSMs on those, they have a very small portfolio, but you can almost imagine a very large client saying, you know what, I want a full-time person, I'm willing to pay for that. Yeah. And that's the career path.
Right. Yeah, and we actually had some of that at Virgin when we would deploy our sort of healthcare solutions to very large employers, right? Like Raytheon. They're like one person, and they actually wanted that person to do the implementation. Like, this is our person, you're like, okay, well, then this is what that costs and everything like that. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of value in that, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Other stuff. Okay, so my next sort of thing was that I like to talk about is what's the 2020 initiative that's got you excited that you're planning for next year?
So we're rolling out for 2020 something we call.
I think we have a duck tour outside the.
This is that you're in like
downtown Boston. This is where
Freedom Trail. Yeah, you get it all. People dressed up in the clothing. It's funny. You go out to grab a sandwich or something, and there's.
Which, by the way, before we get into that, you're the Matrix, where Sweet Green and Starbucks are like right here.
I know, yay. Yeah. I know, I order my salad on my way in on the tea and then pop across the street. So for us, the big initiative is because right now we don't actually come from a place of talking about the impact. Like what was it you set out to do and making sure we're carrying that as a thread. And I think that we need to do that because while our clients love us, we have very high renewal rates. Resting on they love us and we're really nice is a little scary. Yeah. So we're rolling out in 2020 this thing we're calling the impact framework, which is the idea is, hey, let's say a client says, we invested in Panorama because we care deeply about college and career readiness. That's our thing. Okay, well that can mean a lot of different things, right? Or we invested because we care about equity. Well, that can mean a lot of things. Well, let's talk specifically what you mean by that. By equity, do you mean that all students feel equally engaged? Or do you mean that your academics between students of color and white students, the gap is small? Yeah. So the idea is to guide them to like, what is it specifically you're looking to achieve? And then let's carry that all the way through the life cycle. Sure. So we've developed this impact framework for all the use cases that we think our clients care about. Yeah. And there's about 12 of them. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to introduce that during the sales cycle. And one of the beauties of it is if you introduce it in the sales cycle, they're also seeing all the things they haven't thought about yet. Right. So it's a great expansion, sort of like. Oh yeah, here's some things to plan for. So yeah, absolutely. We've built that. 2020, it's about rolling that out into everything that we do so that the CSM, when they're having the conversation, they're like, hey, you said you cared about decreasing, discipline gaps, for example. we ran these surveys, let's look at the result of that. Or now let's bring in academics data and see how that, so everything is around that impact, which is going to be a very new way for us to work.
No, absolutely.
But I'm really excited about it.
No, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. And I've been trying to keep these a little shorter, but I do like to wrap up with sort of like, in what's one non-work thing that you've been doing that you love, especially now that your daughter's graduating. So.
Oh, wow. So my husband and I are doing more traveling.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, we did have a house in Maine. We decided to sell it because of climate change.
Yeah.
It's a little too close to the water. We've been doing some traveling. I'm also, I don't know if you know this, I'm an amateur silversmith.
I now remember this,
Yeah,
but I had
so
totally
actually
forgotten about
recently
that.
set up a full studio in my house.
Oh my gosh.
So in my daughter's bedroom, actually. I got her approval first. And so now I can,
crank it out.
just turn on the torch and
That's amazing.
work for a few hours. Wow. Yeah. So I don't really do it at night during the week because I'm too tired.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing too.
Well,
Yeah.
and as you know, because I play guitar and your husband's a professional musician, that's just something about the routineness. Like when the metronome's on, like there's no work that can be thought about.
That's right. And we'll just
Even if
also,
you love your job,
having
it's
it
just
in the house.
Yeah.
It's like I can just pop upstairs and like do one thing.
Right.
And then
Right. Do a little bit every day.
exactly.
And then you.
So that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much. I'm gonna hit stop unless there's other pearls of
thanks
wisdom.
so much.
Yeah.
I feel honored that you did that.
Oh,
Thank
please.
you.
No, this is like the prime, the one I've been waiting for
Yeah,
a
it's
while.
cool that you do this.
Oh, awesome.
All right.
I'm going to hit stop and
Okay.
we'll go from there.